Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mel Ve, coming to you live on Conscious Consumer Network this Wednesday evening, and it is great to be with you all. It will be 7 p.m. GMT, making it 8 p.m. here in Central Europe, and it sure has been hectic here at CCN headquarters, but we have a great Dragonology Season 3 for you this evening, and of course we are heading down this season very fast because we're already on to episode 10, and we will only be doing up to episode 13 as we do for each season before I take some time out to write book 2. But tonight we will be delving into the topic of light and dark, and I do want to thank those amazing people who write into us and send us comments and share the value that our work brings to their lives. It really is touching, and so inspired by some of the commentary that we've had, we've decided to go down this path tonight. And the particular person who asked me for this episode, I know exactly who they are, because it covers some very interesting territory. And this isn't new to, obviously, the themologies and the areas that we explore with Dragonology, the whole concept of light and dark. But one of the things that you'll always notice is how light and dark tend to not have clearly defined boundaries. They kind of sort of move in and out of each other, which is interesting because it's also turned out to be the subtitle of my first book, being The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy. And, you know, I always, it's interesting when I look at this picture. It reminds me of a time in 1995 when I had just recovered from having been in a wheelchair for quite a period of time after a severe car accident. And I painted this picture, and depicts a moon and a sun on a scale. And this is, you know, we're talking more than 22 years ago now. Yeah, going on 22 years. So it's a long time ago that this imagery was starting to come through into my consciousness and feeling the need to be expressed artistically. It was always kind of like I was meant to be going down this road, and I was being given these images at certain points in my life to point out that, you know, these things have deeper meaning and you need to explore them. Funny enough, even before I started exploring Dragonology and getting really into the sort of occult and symbolism aspect of the work that we do, I wrote this book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, and called it Light and Dark, because for me, the entire journey that we have been on is really one that moves between 2 points. We're never really standing still. We're always constantly moving between light and dark, and it is the contrast that is so beautiful. The contrast between the two is the space in which we learn and grow, and also in which we create. So it's often interesting to see people who are locked down into a very limited left brain paradigm think, oh, you know, you can only be one or the other, or, you know, light is good and dark is bad. And what I intend to illustrate through tonight's Dragonology is just how these things kind of undulate and interlink into each other, and the boundaries, for whatever reason, just aren't clearly defined. In fact, what we need to realize is that light and dark perhaps are two sides of the same coin. And the aspect of duality is, in fact, one of the most common and pervasive themes when you are looking into mythology, legend, history. You know, when we were taught history at high school, we were taught about, you know, this war happened here and this person fought this person. And you kind of taught it from a point of view of the dominant culture, and you taught to back and be on the side of whichever person wrote the history, because the bad guys always lose. And as we've come to know, that's not always the truth. But we do have a very dark, negative aspect to our reality. But we also have the capacity for the most amazing and beautiful love and light and beauty and harmony. And without the two aspects, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the other for what they were, be it positive or negative appreciation. And this is one of the things that I'm hoping to impart on a deeper spiritual level to people as we go into this study of dragonology a little bit more, is that people go, oh, well, were the gods good or were they bad? Were they angels or were they demons? What were they? And the honest truth is that they were both to all things. And at what point, what agenda is being followed or whatever, often is said is beyond the kin and ken of mortal men. But the reality of it is that there is a duality that is inextricably linked to the dragons. And for me, it really comes down to understanding the true nature of our being, of our essence, okay? Let's go through the examples of the dualities we face, for example, the light and the dark, black and white, male and female. Now, here's where you go, okay, so which one's good, which one's bad? Well, neither. One is, for example, the active, and one is the passive generative principle. We've been taught to be judgmental in our ignorance through our programming and conditioning. But obviously, there is a definite people or things that cause loss and harm, and then there's definite things and people that do a lot of benefit for humanity. So there is, for my mind, still a clear definition between good and evil. But when you start to go into dragonology and start looking at gods and devils, it's hard to tell which is which, who are the gods and who are the devils, because what you eventually begin to learn is that there are, in fact, one and the same thing. Angels are demons, demons are angels. And we shall get more into that. I do want to point out a very key aspect when we understand the true nature of duality, and that is duality is not like this, as I've said. It's not clearly defined. It's not a clearly defined line, okay, that's a dark, that's light. Within the light, there is an aspect of dark. And within the dark, there is an aspect of light. That is the way it is in all people. And that, for me, is one of the most beautiful, iconic representations of the yin-yang, which is why you often find the yin-yang turning up with dragons. You will notice that the yin-yang symbol is commonly associated with dragons because it is a much deeper allegory to our true innate spiritual essence, which can be either light or dark, but isn't always completely one thing or the other at any time. However, the conscious choices we make as individuals to either work towards creating a better world or work towards being destructive in our world, for me, that comes down to whether you choose to be in the dark or whether you choose to be in the light. But no person out there is completely light. Everybody, no matter how pure or whole you are, there's some dark element to every person. And it's the same for even the most evil of people, that deep down somewhere there is that spark of love and light that they feel or express for whatever it might be. And it's interesting because even some of the most what I'd call rough and grotesque men that I've met in my life. And one particular example just was so turned into an absolute sweetheart whenever he was around kittens, and that was his soft spot, that was his love and light, despite the fact that his environment had created a very harsh man. There was that sparkle of love in him, and that was what access was his pets and his animals. So everybody has that access point. It doesn't matter how dark you are or how blackened or how evil or how mean. Everybody has a spark of light. And that is so important to remember, is that everybody has the capacity for both. And at all times, we are all both light and both dark, never one thing or the other. The fact that one person can be one or the other, or that line is clearly defined for anybody is not true. That line is a very undulated line. It's not clear-cut, straight down line. It most certainly holds different for all people. One of the themes that we dealt with last week, of course, when we were dealing with sacred geometry was, of course, the tessellated tiles or the squares. And we dealt with the shape last week, and this week we're looking specifically not at the shape of the color, of course. The black is white and the white is black. And that, of course, is a very common and motto and theme of the Jesuits. And Jesuit order, of course, has massive control over the state of global affairs. And it's interesting that this theme is kind of carried on through these holy temples and churches. In fact, as we say, this is actually in a Freemasons lodge. This is a Freemasons lodge carpet. You can see the square and compass there, and of course the interlocking stars we spoke about last week. But the theme of duality is absolutely encoded into temples and churches and sacred places by using tessellation, for example. And tessellation can be used on ceiling tiles, on floors, or whatever. But what they're saying with this is that what you think is light is actually dark, and what you think is dark is actually light. The darkness we perceive is the wisdom, and what we perceive as light is actually the ignorance. And I will go on to explain this a little bit more. The whole theme of duality, obviously the most obvious and inescapable example of duality is the cycle we live in every day, within the 24-hour cycle, the occurrence of day and night. And historically and in mythology, particularly in Egyptian mythology, you have this whole movement being played out in a story which personifies night and day into godlike forms. And there's a big story about what happens between day and night. And, you know, and at sunrise, it's sun and day that are triumphing over night, and at sunset it's the night and darkness that are triumphing over the light, and so the cycle continues. And again, like I said, we're always moving between 2 points. It's never always going to be day, and it's never always going to be night. Just like the sun is always moving, and the movements of the sun are so important, so too we're always moving between the aspects of light and dark. Even if it's not on a spiritual, definitely during the day, because, you know, within a few hours, it's going to be dark, and you know that. It's just the way it is. Everybody experiences day and night. So that, for me, is the most obvious and most ingrained duality that we as human beings experience, programmed into the very fabric of our reality. It's one of the most innate understandings that we gain from a very young age. It's the concept of night and dark, okay, day and night. And of course, the movements of the sun is a central part of ritual and various aspects of dragonology, as we've discussed. Everything revolves around the seasons, the cycles of the sun. And we have touched a little bit on this because, of course, we've got Easter coming up, that most of the holidays that we experience happen at a certain time of year. For example, Christmas happens once a year, as does Easter, and particularly the Christmas holiday is tied in with the movements of the sun. For example, on the 21st of December, it becomes solstice, and the sun stops moving for 3 days on the northern hemisphere, from the northern hemisphere's perspective at least. And on the 25th, the sun rises 1 degree to the north again, which of course is referenced as the birth of the sun, or the birth of Jesus. And of course, the whole Jesus story is nothing more than an astrotheological hybrid of a solar messiah. And this is why we call Christmas a solar ritual, because it absolutely has to do with the movements of the sun, as does Easter. Because Easter is meant to mark out spring. And spring, of course, means that the days are getting longer, and it's time to plant your seeds in the ground, because summer's going to come and you want to get all the good sun from summer, so that when harvest time comes, which when you then have more rituals, okay, you've got good harvest. Easter, or spring, or the springtime ritual of Easter, marks the start of planting season. Okay, and again, it has to do with the movements of the sun. The movements of the sun dictate the growth of crops and the harvests. Now, interestingly enough, obviously we're talking about day and night, but the word day has some very, very obvious similarities, which most people, it just kind of goes over their heads. But obviously, because the movement of the sun is so important, the word day has to come from somewhere important as well. And it does, because if you look at where the word day comes from, it originates from the same group of words as deity, not too hard to work that out, day and deity, and then deva or diva, as some people say, or divi, as in divine, divination, a divine nature, and then deus, which is actually the original spelling of Zeus, all right? Zeus being the number one god, the god at the top of the Greek pantheon. And the Greek god Zeus was king of the gods in ancient Greek, and his equivalent to the Roman god Jupiter. So when Rome conquered Greece and took over all their gods, Zeus became Jupiter. And then when Roman polytheism turned into Roman monotheism in the form of the Roman Catholic Church, Jupiter then turned into the equivalent, he became the patron saint of the Roman Catholic Church, being Saint Peter. So to show you how the gods change names, but it's ultimately referencing the same entity. Zeus commonly depicted with an eagle, or as an eagle, or as a swan in his therianthropic form, as we have previously discussed in dragonology. But interesting to notice that the name Deus actually originates or is tied into the same word group as day, all right? And again, it just goes into show that even the worship of the gods had to do with the movements of the sun. And of course, day is associated with light, and that is not very hard to understand. Of course, when the sun comes out, it's light and we can see everything. And then when the sun goes away, it gets all dark. So common understanding there. But it's interesting to see where the word light turns up. The word light turns up in words such as enlighten or literacy. For example, take away the L-I-T, okay? If you got the L-I-T, take away the G-H, you have the word lit as in literature or literacy. And this gives an inclination as to what the word light actually is referencing, okay? The word light is associated with knowledge and wisdom, because you have the word light turning up in things like literature, literacy, illuminate, which is just a synonym for enlighten. So enlightenment, it's like illumination, knowledge, all of that kind of stuff. But the word light very much ties into the themology through the etymology of knowledge and wisdom. Of course, these two themes inextricably linked with the dragon. And the other place where the whole light theme turns up is the story of the genie and the lamp, because what does the lamp do? A lamp gives light. But the story of the genie and the lamp is an interesting one, and there's just so much deep symbolic allegory there. But notice that this genie, okay, and again the genie is just another representation of the dragon, comes out of a lamp. So the genie brings the knowledge, because the lamp brings the light. The light obviously would be coming out of the lamp would be the genie. And that would be the symbolic aspect of it. Of course, just to mention that the word genie is etymologically cognizant with the word genius. The correlation between knowledge and wisdom and dragon is illustrated again in the word genius, because let's look at where the word genius originates from. Our favorite root word for the Arabic classification of a dragon being a jinn, okay? Either spelled with a D-J-G-N or the D-J-I-N-N, J-I-N-N, jinn as in gin and tonic, gon as in dragon, gen as in genetics, or gene or genesis or genius. So that is how this language all ties into each other. The genie and the lamp, okay, the lamp obviously coming from the linking to the light, because light comes out of a lamp. What else would be the purpose of having a lamp in your house but to provide light? And then, of course, the genie, which comes from the lamp, links the word genius. It's actually etymologically cognizant with each other. The word genius obviously means someone who has a lot of knowledge or wisdom, and someone perhaps like Albert Einstein. What's interesting to notice is when you talk about words of light, this is where we start to go, uh-oh, this is where light starts to cross into what we consider to be darkness, maybe. And when I say it isn't undulating, it's not a straight, clear cut, this is this and that's that. The light and dark kind of interweave back and forward into each other. And here is where it becomes much clearer, because when you start looking at depictions of Lucifer, okay, and this is a lovely one that we found of, as you can see, quite an old depiction. In this depiction, Lucifer is actually eating people. Okay, that's he's stuffing his face with people, and there's people falling all around him, and you can see pretty nasty talons on the feet and wings, typical of, you know, humanoid dragon representations. Yet the word Lucifer comes from the Latin word lux ver, which means light bearer or light bringer. So the bringer of the light, the person who brought the knowledge, or brings the knowledge, or brings the wisdom. That's interesting. It's worth also noting that the word luxury or luxurious comes also from the root of lux ver. Lux ver, of course, the Latin word for Lucifer. Another person who was associated with being a bringer of the light is the Greek god Prometheus. Of course, this is one of my favorite stories in Greek mythology, and Prometheus was the Greek god that stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, and is said to be mankind's best friend, the greatest friend of humanity, because he gave us fire. Now, that can be so many different allegories. We can look at fire in terms of they gave us fire, we didn't know how to use it, so suddenly we knew how to keep warm and cook food and boil water, or they gave us fire in terms of the knowledge of energy. You know, maybe they did have electricity in those past advanced civilizations, very possible. Or they gave us fire, Prometheus gave us fire, really symbolically, in terms of fire and light is referenced or is meant to mean or is symbolically equated with knowledge and wisdom again. And we all know what happened to Prometheus for doing this deed of giving humanity the fire and being such a great friend of mankind. He was stranded on the mountain and his liver ripped out over and over again by an eagle. And of course, this is what Zeus did to him. Yeah, great relationship these gods have with each other. Anyway, the apple is also very much a symbol of knowledge and wisdom. This is why Apple Computers has the apple as the symbol, and with a little bite out of it. And really, as we've said many times before, the Apple symbol of Apple Macintosh computers is actually the symbol of the apple in the Garden of Eden. Why? Because apple in the Garden of Eden is a symbol of knowledge. The snake gave Eve the access to knowledge and wisdom. And this is proven by the statement in Genesis 3, verses 22, Genesis chapter 3, verses 22, where it says, man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. So once Eve bit from the fruit and obviously gave it to Adam, man had become like the gods, one of us. This is the gods talking. And obviously it's not one God, because it says us, referencing there's more than one of the gods, okay? So man has now become like one of us, knowing both good and evil, being in possession of the knowledge of light and dark, good and evil. That is what the good and evil means. The good and evil also reference knowing both God and the devil, knowing the extremes of light, knowing the extremes of dark, okay? Because the word good is actually where you get the word God, and the word evil is where you get the word devil. And this has been probably one of the most obvious ways in which our language has been manipulated into getting us to perceive things in a certain way. And I'm not saying that, you know, all those Satan hoaxers and whatever are going to come at me going, oh yeah, no, she says the devil's good. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we've been convinced into believing a certain perspective by very clever spelling and sleight of hand. Look how clear evil and devil are in terms of their spelling. Just like look how very clear God and good are in terms of their spelling. Let me take it from the other side. How are we to know that God is all good if so many suffer upon this planet? But yet we are forced to believe that through the fact that they make the words very, very similar. And it's very clear cognitive programming, getting us to be locked into this duality, you know, believing either one or the other, when we don't have a clear understanding that it's not a clearly defined line. Humanity needs to evolve to a place of far more tolerance and understanding towards all aspects of the true nature of light and dark, because light and dark can be both God, it can be both the devil. It's not one or the other. So moving on to the word dark, okay. Dark obviously symbolically represented by night and contains the dragon root word ark, okay, A-R-K, here present. And of course the K becomes a C in certain contexts as well, which alludes to the word group arch as an archangel and archon. And that is interesting, of course, nice picture of Archangel Michael there. Moving on to the word night. Okay, so dark obviously symbolically represents night because it gets dark at night. The word night, of course, etymologically cognizant with the word night, just putting a K in front of it. But when we talk about this kind of night, we're not talking about night and day. We're talking about the kind that comes from the Roman Catholic Church and performs all sorts of wars and has had interesting places in history. You'll notice how many very famous people in interesting political positions are all Knights of Malta or whatever else. But yeah, interesting to notice that they use the theme, the Dark Knight, for the Batman films. I could never understand why they decided to rename the Batman films The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Returns. What was all with that? There's a very good reason why they've done this, okay? Is first off, they want us to believe in a savior. Remember, the hero, the savior of the night. But because he does it by the darkness of night, or under the cover of the darkness of night, he is the Dark Knight. But they kind of also don't really go into why bats. You know, and I do want to say, like most comic book heroes, Batman is also a symbol of the dragon. So we've got to ask ourselves, what is it with the bat thing? I mean, bats are not sexy and bats don't come across as powerful creatures. They're actually pretty small creatures. The vampire bats can be pretty nasty, but the reality is that it just doesn't make sense why the bats, and that is quite simply because bats are the only mammals that can fly with wings, that have propulsion, movement ability with wings. There is no other mammal, and human beings are mammals. There's no other mammal out there that has wings and that can fly like a bat or a bird. A bat has as much mobility and movement in the sky, if not more, than your average flying bird. And why that's important, and I always say this, is because wings are one of the key symbols of the dragon, particularly when wings are placed on something that would not normally have wings. For example, a humanoid figure with wings, be it an angel, be it a jinn, whatever it may be, because they're not meant to have wings, what you're looking at is you're looking at a dragon. You're looking at a representation of a dragon. Be it an angel, be it a fairy, whatever it might be. And this is what the bat representation is. The bat representation is there because bats are the only mammals that can fly with wings. It's the wings that give the bat its importance in this context of dragonology. And of course, I do have to point out that there is some very deep, dark, underlying themes that come with Batman, as with all of these comic book heroes, which are really just dragon savior memes paraded around in front of children for the purpose of acquiescing our energy towards the dragon, the looshing of our energy. If they can get us to put all our attention and energy into their symbols, they get to control everything that we do. So what is interesting to notice is the key themes that turn up in the Batman story. For example, the Batman was orphaned. It's a famous part of the story. They do this every time they redo Batman, is the killing scene of his parents. And, you know, the pills fall on the floor. Of course, the pills have a symbolic significance as well. But Batman loses both his parents and inherits a fortune and then becomes Batman. But the orphaned theme is very important. Don't forget, the word orphan has two very key dragon root words in, the O-R, or, and the F-A-N, P-H-A-N, I beg your pardon, P-H-A-N, which is fan, the root of phantom and fanes. And you also get the word pan and pain from this root as well. But the orphaned root, if you want to learn more about this, please do go check out my book, Dragonology, Book 1 Spellbreaker, which you can download from dragonology.info. And it goes deeply into exploring the allegory behind the themes of orphans, okay? And then, of course, one of the key aspects of Batman is that he has two forms. He has who he is as Batman and then who he is as Bruce Wayne. Again, an allegory of being able to morph or change form, skin changer, shapeshifter. And then, of course, there's these superhuman or supernatural abilities, which, dragons have. They can fly, they can appear and disappear and change shape. And, of course, one of the key ones being that they're masked. It's amazing to notice how many of these superheroes in these comic stories are masked, and it's always the same story. They put on a cape and some funny suit, spandex suit and a mask, and then they're this superhero or that superhero. And really, it's the same story over and over again about these guys against the bad guys, and what you're looking at is just an extended allegory of day versus night, played into a thematic ritual which is put in front of young children to get them brainwashed into the draconian construct programming, to get us putting our energies into idol worship and putting our power outside ourselves. Even if they can't get us with religion, which they most of the time can't do to young kids these days, kids are too switched on, they get them by getting them locked into these cults of comic book idolatry. And this is almost like a religion to these kids sometimes. An example of how important the whole winged aspect obviously turns up in various cultures that you've been covering off with us in dragonology. Obviously, one of the most common ones is in Egyptian mythology. Here's a lovely depiction of a serpent with wings. Of course, serpents don't generally have wings. So the winged serpent aspect, the wings are very important because when you're looking at anything that's not supposed to have wings, that does have wings, it's a symbolic representation of the dragon, as the example of the Batman allegory we've just covered. But the wings turn up again in many different places, again with serpents, and an example of this is the caduceus, which comes from Greek mythology and is commonly carried by Hermes. Okay, vampires. Now, why it's interesting to go into the vampire allegory at this stage is because when we looked at the whole Batman aspect of it, there is such a thing as a vampire bat. And you can't ignore that that's kind of where they were going with the Batman thing to one level, okay? And the whole Batman thing, yes, Batman's nocturnal, Batman normally only comes out at night. And the funny thing is, it's the same thing with vampires. They are nocturnal creatures. And the concept of the vampire has many interpretations, really depending on which culture. But much like dragons, the vampire is a constantly recurring archetype throughout history. And in fact, when you talk about Dracula, you talk about Count Dracula. Oh, yes, we get into the royalty. In fact, most of royalty who are the dragon bloodline do drink blood and probably are very much a little bit like this kind of look when they've morphed into their draconian shape to imbibe the blood of a ritual. But this is what you're dealing with is this very much culture that's played out these elements in various themes. And of course, the vampire film genre is one of the most overdone film genres, and just another example of how these archetypes have been softened down in our minds and played out repetitively to reprogram and reiterate these themes and reinforce them into the psyche of society and into the psyche of our children, without our kids actually realizing how damaging this programming is. So the word vampire is an interesting one because it contains the dragon root word pyre. Okay, now pyre is interesting. There's a lot of things that come off from pyre. Of course, we talk about the common dragon root triad, pala, para, pio. Pyre, obviously, is from this particular root, the pio root of this triad. And pyre obviously can be peer, where you can see the I and the E's being swapped around, or peer with double E, or even pair is in the feet. And we've spoken about this a lot, why pair symbolism turns up in so many depictions of heraldry on shields. Interesting to notice that because the pair is a symbol of the dragon. Okay, etymologically cognizant with key dragon root words. And for pair, we've got fear, okay? Fire, which, interesting. because again, fire and light, we've dealt with that theme already. And then look, we've got fear as in Luxfear, Luxfear being the Latin word of Lucifer, fear, which then goes to ferry, as in the boat that we take across from Calais to Dover is the ferry. And then, of course, the little fairy like Tinkerbell with wings. And then the Furies, which are a triad of very angry winged Greek demonesses that have serpents wrapped around them in Greek depictions. Then, of course, we go on to the Fae, and the Fae are very much like the fairy. We talk about Morgan and the Fae when we talk about the tales of Camelot. And fan, as in fan, my fan, or you have a great fan in me. Or, you know, wave yourself with a fan. But this, of course, then goes on to fantasy and fable. And then, as we already mentioned, the word phantom, feigns, pan, and pain. And you can see how these words kind of eventually all lead into each other, because you start coming up with the A allegories over here and you bring it back to here, the pala parapeel. So the great thing about dragonology and the etymology is you can always kind of bring it back on itself, because these things all tie into each other. And if they didn't, it wouldn't be a true science. It wouldn't be as profound as it is. And we wouldn't be able to say that we are truly locked into a cycle of draconian enslavement and construct, because we can see how everything ties into each other and how beautifully the whole thing has been constructed through our language, through the literature, through the artwork, through the symbolism, through our music and pastimes and culture. Dealing with the word fire, as you said, we have the word fire over here. Turning up in this particular group of words that tie into pyre, which comes from vampire, and fire. The word vampire contains the root word pyre, which is etymologically cognizant with pyro. Okay, all we do is swap out the consonants there, but pyro is a Greek word meaning fire. And of course, we've already mentioned fire, an allegory which can create light, be knowledge, wisdom. Okay, so it is a word very much associated with light, knowledge, and wisdom. And yet, fire can also be destructive. And this is where we talk about how light and dark are crossing boundaries here. Of course, one of the things the dragons are known to be able to do is to breathe fire. It's one of the periodic elements, not periodic elements, it's one of the creational elements that are inextricably linked with the dragon, much like air, water, earth, and fire, one of the elements that are inextricably found with dragonology wherever you look. All right, sun and moon. The sun and the moon. These are great symbols because they turn up just about everywhere, and on flags, on shields, and in religion, in the cult. The sun and the moon are just about everywhere. And of course, day and night are symbolically represented by the sun and the moon, as I had in my picture of my book cover. The sun and the moon represent the ultimate symbols of duality, of the ultimate contrast. In turn, there are many gods taking on celestial aspects, such as sun god and moon goddesses. All right? And I'll give you an example of this. This is Selene, a moon goddess, and you'll notice here she's carrying a torch with fire, okay, like the Statue of Liberty would or Prometheus would, and she's got a moon, a crescent moon on her head. Here we go, another depiction, a little moon on her head. She is a moon goddess. Selene is a moon goddess, and Lean actually is consonant with the word Luna, L-U-N-A. Whenever you see the word Lean, Selene, you're referencing Luna, moon. All right, sun gods. We've already spoke about in previous dragonologies this topic of sun gods and just how they seem to turn up in just about every culture in history. For example, the Persian or Roman sun god was known as Mithra and depicted with sun rays around his head, just as the Egyptian sun god was known as Horus, also depicted with the sun above his head and wrapped in a serpent. It's also interesting to notice that the symbol of the sun can be dualistic within its own being, removed from the moon. Okay, so we're not talking about the sun and the moon as our diametric opposites of each other, but the symbol of the sun, dualistic of its own self, and is often represented as the black sun, a common depiction in alchemy and the occult. And the duality of the sun is interesting because this is kind of played out in various cultural mythologies across the world. For example, in the story of Horus and Seth. Now, as we've already said, Horus, the Egyptian sun god, depicted as a peregrine falcon, is a sun god, the epitome of light and day and goodness and whatever else. And Seth is the god of night, the underworld, supposedly the exact opposite being the black sun. And as I already said, the way it works was that all day Horus would be fighting Seth and would succumb to Seth at night, and Seth would then beat Horus in a war, and then all night they would be supposedly warring in the underworld where Horus would rise triumphant in the morning and be the sunrise. And this is the duality of the sun played out in the allegory of the day sun and the dark sun. The black sun in Mesoamerican mythology has many mystical meanings. Among them is the connection to the winged or plumed serpent known as Quetzalcoatl. We've dealt with him before. The serpent eating a man over here with plumage on his head. Quetzalcoatl and his penetration into the underworld through the west door after his daily journey across the sky as the sun god. Okay, and the western sky, as the sun went down, that was seen as the dark sun. The day sun was seen as the first sun of daylight as it rose in the east. So they also had the concept of a day sun and a dark sun. All right, they acknowledged two suns, the young day sun and the ancient dark sun. It's funny, in some cultures, the ancient dark sun is seen as being the feminine creative aspect of Gaia. Now, moving on to Viracocha, and I do want to thank my friend Joe for actually pointing me in this direction. Joe Lomax, she sent me a lovely link and sent me down a whole different direction of discovery, and found out that, you know, it doesn't matter which cultural mythology you look at, everything comes back to dragonology. You can tie everything back in at some level, because guess what? All these gods in different cultures absolutely all represent the same quintessential beings, which we reference now commonly as dragons. Okay, Viracocha. Let's look at Viracocha. Of course, the word vir, a dragon root word, so the word C-O-C-A, coca, if you took away the H. So you've got two key dragon root words in the word Viracocha. And he was considered the creator god, the father of all other Incan gods. And it was he who formed the earth, heavens, and all living things. He traveled far and wide, teaching humanity and bringing them civilized arts. There we go. Another one who brought them the arts of writing, the arts of cultivating the earth, of agriculture, temple building, geometry. Okay, we've spoken about gods like this before, such as Thoth, Oannes, all these gods that turn up in different parts of the world doing the very same thing, all of them having distinct dragon features. Okay, so Oannes brought civilized arts before he headed west across the Pacific, never to be seen again, but promising to return. In his absence, lesser deities were assigned the duties of looking after humanity. And the lesser deities that were left in place, of course, were the royal dragon bloodlines, what we reference as the kings and royalty of our present day. The Fisher Kings, we're talking about kings and royalty, this is what they're known as in history collectively. Okay, and at the dawn of the present time cycle, just after the great flood of Noah, recorded in the Bible and elsewhere, a mysterious group of God-men appeared at various locations around the planet to initiate the survivors of the cataclysm in the rudiments of civilization. Legends from Peru to Sumeria, ancient Egypt to India, recount the arrival of godlike beings appearing after the Great Flood. Osiris and the Egyptian Thoth, India's Vishnu, Enki, and Oannes of Sumerian and Babylonia, Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha in the Americas are remembered in the ancient worldwide legends as a group of beings collectively referred to as the Fisher Kings. And this is a carving of Viracocha. It's called the Bennett monolith. It's at Tiahuanaca now. But if you have a look at this carving of Viracocha, it's actually got little fish heads on the lower part of his body. So little fish heads all over the carved in here. Interesting, because he was one of the fish kings. And then, of course, you see examples of Oannes and Dagon turning up in Mesopotamia and Samaria and Babylonia, also all depicted like with fish, sort of cloaks or bodies. Here we go again, another depiction of Dagon or Oannes with a fish hat kind of hung on him. But very much the fisher kings or fisher god kings were an interesting bunch of people that came after the biblical flood and gave humanity the arts of geometry, the arts of maths, of writing, of arts, of temple building, of astronomy. And of course, we know this lovely hat that the Pope wears is called the mitre, and that it commonly takes after the hat worn by the Babylonian god called Dagon or Oannes. There's various depictions of this particular individual, as we've already seen. But the mitre looks just like a fish head. Okay, looks just like a fish head. There's the mouth of it. Here's a good example. There would be the eye. Looks just like that. Another interesting place that the fish symbol turns up is referencing Christianity, or as a symbol of Jesus. Jesus was said to be a fisher of men, or a fisherman, and there's many stories about Jesus turning one fish into 100 fish. Again, all deep, much deeper symbolic allegory to the whole fish story, and it's got nothing to do with anything that's actually written in the Bible about Jesus turning one fish into 100 fish. The fish symbolism, Jesus being a fisher of men, actually being one of the fisher kings. We have dealt with this many times before, how the quintessential archetype of Jesus is in fact part of the royal dragon bloodline, as can be proven in many different ways. We've already been through that, so I won't go back there. But interesting to notice the fish allegory and symbolism referencing yet another very key aspect or person in history to turn up and actually be part of the royal dragon bloodline. Another interesting place where you have these fish turning up, and they're fish that don't kind of look like any fish you'll find in the ocean. So they're kind of fantasy type fish. I mean, this is not the kind of fish you would find anywhere in the ocean, but what's interesting to notice is that these depictions of fish turn up in these very old fountains and sculptures, which have these little nude naked cherubs on them. And I just want to point out how provocatively they always position these naked little kids. Like this naked kid looks like he's riding on a fish and can be a bit sexual. But this also, again, just the legs spread and the way he's straddling the fish is, I don't know, a bit pederast in my personal opinion, knowing how deep the allegory goes. But you can see here, again, very much seems to be a real affection going on between this little childlike depiction of a cherub and the fish, you know, cuddling the fish. And this is not something you would commonly find, is children cuddling a big fish in this way. In fact, there's a very deep and disturbing dark allegory to all of this, and it has to do with the mastering of two key themes. First off, the dragon, which is represented by the fish, and pederasty, a key part of various ritual practices within the occult circles. The depiction of naked youths and infants as angelic or dragon representations, such as the cherubim or putti, is an allegory towards the destruction of the innocent through pederast behavior and child sacrifice. And a good example of this is the Caravaggio version of Amor Vincit Omnia, which means love conquers all. And this picture has often been interpreted as an idealized expression of pederastic love. Again, very, very, you know, in your face, full frontal, legs apart, young youth, genitals showing. I mean, some people at one point probably just look at this and think it's art until you begin to understand the deeper allegory behind all of this kind of stuff. It becomes a bit more disturbing when you see just how pervasive the prevalence of nude children are, naked babies are in Christianic artworks, all referencing child sacrifice. And of course, nudity and nakedness is in and of itself a symbol of the dragon bloodline. Nudity or nakedness alludes to the angelic dragon bloodline. Very clear when you start to look at the language. Let's go to the etymology of this one. Naked and snake have a very, very key root word dominating both words completely. Nake, N-A-K-E, N-A-K-E. Both contain the dragon root word N-A-K-E, nake, as in snaked or naked. And this is a beautiful depiction of Lilith by John Collier. And of course, she's naked with the serpents slithering around her. Always the serpents. Moving on to the extended themes and allegory. The theme of nudity being an allegory referencing the dragon becomes evident when we look at the mythological creature called Nek, Nixie, or Nokken, okay, which are shape-shifting water spirits in English, Germanic, and Scandinavian folklore. Words derived from this origin, okay, include Nixie, obviously, ties in with pixie. Nacken, I mean, if you think of the word, what the word night is in Dutch or German, it's nach, okay? So nacken, which is another name for a neck or a nixie or a nocken, ties in with night, nach. And then, of course, night, as in Crusaders' Knights, and naked. All these words tie into each other. And you can even think of the word like neck, as in, you know, naked. You can kind of see how neck and naked are etymologically cognizant with each other as well. Like I said, this word nacken by Ernst Josephson actually is a depiction of the water sprite, okay? The water sprite. And of course, sprites are, again, just another depiction of the dragon, evident when you start looking at the root words within the word sprite. Got R-I-T, root of ritual, and write, as in with a pen. And then S-P-R-I, as in spirit or spy, clear root in there as well. So interesting to notice the word, they use the word water sprite, because a neck is really moving into your more common water deities as they're associated in various European folklores. The Queen Melusine character that we've come to know through the studies of dragonology was also commonly referenced as a neck, a water spirit. And Queen Melusine, of course, commonly depicted in her bathtub. This is a very famous 16th century depiction from a children's book of Queen Melusine's secret discovered, her husband spying on her and seeing that she actually is a shape-shifting dragon. In her private, in her bath. Of course, he obviously didn't know that she was a dragon and that she could shapeshift. It's an interesting story. For those who want to learn more about it, please do check out my book, Dragonology Spellbreaker, Book 1. But very much is a case that Queen Melusine was a water sprite or a neck, as you said, normally always depicted various references in water and with a mermaid's tail. Of course, Melusine is the icon who is represented in the Starbucks logo. Other water deities include Doris, which Doris then is depicted with a hippocampus, a hippocampus, which is a horse with a dragon's tail or a serpent's tail or a fish's tail. Sometimes not the deities, but what they are riding or the carriage they're being pulled in, which has the serpentine depictions. Funny enough, another water deity is actually also the Gorgons. Interesting because the word Gorgon, when you start to look at, for example, the chapels and Christianic temples that are around, you'll notice something called a gargoyle, which are water spouts that direct the water away from the side of the building so that you don't get water erosion. And the word gargoyle, actually, it comes from the same word group as gorgon. A gargoyle, you know, directs water away, and a gorgon is a water deity. All these things tie in with each other. And the last little bit of thing that I want to carry on talking about tonight is one of the most interesting aspects of light and dark, which is that often the true nature of things are hidden, okay, and what we seem to understand perhaps and we're taught in our 3D reality perhaps isn't all there is to know. There are certain things that are in the light for us and other things that are sort of hidden away in the dark. And this hidden aspect is a very key theme with dragonology, which is why dragons come up in so many different forms, is because ultimately they're trying to hide their identity. And one of the most obvious allegories of this for me would be when you look at the concept of the aegis. And the aegis, this is what it is over here, how it has been depicted. And you can see this, it's got a face of a gorgon on it, which is why we mentioned at this point, because we talk about the gorgons. Now, Medusa was also a gorgon. Medusa had serpents for hair. It's also the face of the Versace logo. But it is said that both Athena and Zeus carried an aegis. And although its nature is uncertain, it has been interpreted as an animal skin or shield, sometimes bearing the head of a gorgon. Okay, so you can see the gorgon's face in there, perhaps some skin, and there's little serpents twisting off it there. It's interesting because when we talk about aegis in our more vernacular language of present day, the way we describe an aegis is we use it in the context of I'm going to visit the fudge shop under the aegis of wanting to do business with them, but really I just want to buy some fudge, for example. It's a very bad example, but it's kind of like under the cover of, or under the pretenses of, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, under the aegis. Very, very interesting that an aegis is, of course, then of a dragon nature, because what we're talking about here is a disguise, a masking, a covering, okay? And covering is very interesting because when we talk about that which is hidden, we are talking about the occult. The word occult quite literally means that which is hidden. And there's so many things that really tie into this. You know, when we talk about the Kaaba stone in Mecca, the word Kaaba is etymologically cognizant with the word cover, and that Kaaba stone is in fact covered with a shroud. And for example, the mask allegory, which came up tonight when we were speaking about Batman, that's a very key theme when it comes to dragon representation, is that they're covered, is that their true nature is not known. And we start looking at the elements of ritual and holiday, like Christmas and Easter, as we spoke about today, and the giving of gifts, which of course is a sacrifice, how they wrap gifts, which is in and of itself part of the ritual, forms part of the creating the occult or the cover, okay? That which is hidden behind wrapping. That's why we wrap presents so people can't see what it is underneath. Interesting. And then, of course, finally, the duality is symbolized in theatre too. And, of course, we've dealt with the allegories pertaining to the etymology of theatre, which tie into the study of dragonology. The theatrical masks, which commonly represent comedy and tragedy, symbolically express the duality of the dragon. And this must be a very common symbol for anybody who understands the theatre or has a little bit of culture. The word theatre is very interesting again because it contains the key dragon root word T-H-E. And we've spoken about this word in great length, but this word turns up in some very interesting places. For example, theology, theosophy, which is Blavatsky's religion, Thelema, Aleister Crowley's religion, Athena. Of course, we have Athena wearing the aegis over here. Athena wears the aegis, okay? Therianthropy, the ability to shapeshift. Theophany, which is the ability to appear and disappear. Of course, thesaurus, talking about words and language and literature. And then theme, probably the words we use the most when we are talking about dragonology is this theme and that theme ties into this and that. The word theme, of course, is absolutely key. That's it for tonight, folks. If you have missed anything for the Dragonology Season 3 round, please go back and check out the archives. And if you have missed Seasons 1 and 2, they're also available on the archives at dragonology.info. 13 episodes in each, and we're coming up to the end of season 3 very, very shortly. But I'll be taking a week's break next week because I have the non-disclosure conference, which I'll be doing a presentation at, so I won't be doing Dragonology next week. But feel free to go back and see any of the episodes you've missed to catch up on all the amazing information. As I said, you can get that at dragonology.info, where you can also find a copy of my book, Dragonology, Book 1, Spellbreaker. And you can get a €5 discount if you use the discount code DragonologyS3. That's Dragonology S3 for Season 3. And you can get the book for €20 instead of 25 by using the discount code. So again, go to the website, dragonology.info, and you can get a copy of my book from there. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm very accessible and always willing to talk to people who share an interest in this information. Feel free to send it to info@consciousconsumernetwork.info. I beg your pardon, .tv. And of course, the broadcast guide. Check out everything you need to that's showing on Conscious Consumer Network, all listed on the broadcast guide, and it's updated weekly. We have up to 25 live broadcasts a week, and they come from all different parts of the world with all different amazing bits of information shared by some of the most incredible people on the planet. And we are truly blessed to work with amazing people, and I recommend to check out some of the other shows if you're a fan of Dragonology. All the archives for everything that we do on Conscious Consumer Network is available at ccn.media. Please do go to our archive website and check out everything that we've done. There's lots to choose from, over 2,000 shows over the last 2 and a bit years, so plenty to keep you getting educated. All the things to do with Conscious Consumer Network, of course, available on our website. The CCN Live is available. If you just want to go and watch one of our shows live, you click here, the broadcast guide, and of course it is listed on the home page as well. And as always, we ask you to support Conscious Consumer Network. It is a publicly run network, and we put this information out there out of the pure love for humanity. Do support the CCN Network Support Fund for 2017. Without you guys, we simply just can't keep going. And as always, we thank you for supporting free and independent media. My name is Mel Ve, and I will be with you again. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. And this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.